Ever find yourself humming a tune a colleague constantly plays? Or maybe even adopting a quirky saying from your neighbor without really thinking about it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a really common thing, isn't it? We just sort of absorb things from the people around us.
Exactly. And a huge chunk of how we learn seems to happen just like that, by observing others. That's what we're digging into today.
That's right. Direct teaching is one thing, personal experience another, but so much comes from just watching what others do and, crucially, what happens to them after they do it.
And the main framework for understanding this is social cognitive learning theory, or it used to be called social learning theory, right?
Right.
Mainly thanks to Albert Bandura.
Yes, Bandura's work was foundational. He really mapped out how this observational learning works.
And this isn't just like some dusty academic theory. Understanding this stuff gives real insights into, well, everything. How kids pick things up, how trends spread, even how you, the listener, can maybe get better at learning new skills or breaking bad habits.
For sure, it touches on personal development, parenting, societal shifts. It's really broad.
So for this deep dive, we've looked at some core explanations of the theory itself and detailed accounts of Bandura's big studies.
Yeah, the goal is to pull out the key ideas, make it clear how this whole learning by watching thing operates, and, why it actually matters day to day.
Okay, let's jump in. What's the absolute, like, rock bottom basic idea here?
Well, the core principle is just that. We learn by watching other people, we call them models in the theory, and then we might imitate what they do.
Right. Seeing is potentially doing.
Exactly. And what's super interesting is that this learning can happen even if we don't get any direct reward or punishment for it. We don't have to be the ones getting the feedback.
Okay, so I don't need to, like, burn my hand on the stove to learn its height. I can just see someone else do it and go, ouch.
That's a perfect analogy, and Bandura called this vicarious reinforcement or vicarious punishment. We learn by seeing if the model gets praised or gets into trouble.
Vicarious, like living through someone else's experience.
Precisely. See someone get a bonus for working late, might make you think about staying late. See someone get told off for being late. You'll probably try harder to be on time. It bypasses direct experience.
Makes total sense. We're constantly kind of scanning the results others are getting. But it's not just automatic, right? Like, see, there are steps involved, cognitive stuff.
Oh, absolutely. It's not just mimicry. Bandura stressed the cognitive parts. He laid out 4 key elements. First up is attention.
Got to notice it first.
Exactly. You can't learn from a model if you're not paying attention to them or what they're doing. And lots of things affect attention. Is the model interesting? Do they seem like an expert? Is the behavior itself something cool or desirable?
Okay, so if I want to learn, say, a complicated guitar riff, I'm going to pay way more attention to a skilled guitarist playing it than, my uncle just strumming randomly.
Makes sense, right? The second element is retention. You've got to remember what you observed.
So it needs to stick in your head somehow.
Yep. This involves mentally encoding it, maybe creating a mental image or running through the steps in your mind, storing it so you can pull it up later.
Like visualizing the chord shapes or remembering the sequence of notes.
Exactly. Then third, there's motivation. You actually have to want to do the behavior.
The why bother factor.
Kind of. Bandura talked about outcome expectancies. Basically, what do you think will happen if you perform the action? Do you expect praise, success, some kind of reward, or maybe you expect a negative outcome?
So if I see that guitarist getting huge applause after playing that riff, my motivation to learn it probably shoots up.
You got it. And the final piece, number 4, is potential, or as Bandura famously called it, self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy, that's like
Yeah.
believing you can actually do it.
Exactly that. It's your belief in your own capability to successfully perform the action you observed. You need to feel you're physically or mentally up to the task.
Okay, that's huge. Because I might see that amazing guitar riff, be super motivated by the applause, remember the notes. But if I think, my fingers could never move that fast, I might not even try.
Precisely. Low self-efficacy can stop imitation dead in its tracks, even if the other elements are there. High self-efficacy, on the other hand, makes you more likely to give it a go.
So those 4 things, attention, retention, motivation, and potential, or self-efficacy, they all need to line up for observational learning to lead to action.
Pretty much, yes. And then beyond those internal cognitive factors, there are also things about the model and the situation that influence whether we imitate.
Okay, like what? What makes us more likely to copy one person over another?
Well, one big factor is consistency. If a model acts the same way across different situations, like they're consistently patient or consistently skilled at something, we're more likely to see that as a stable trait worth imitating.
Right, compared to someone who's all over the place. You don't know what to expect or learn.
Exactly. Then there's identification with the model. We tend to copy people we see as similar to ourselves.
Uh-huh. Like age, gender, maybe shared interests.
Yep, all those things. If you perceive someone as being like you're often more inclined to think, hey, if they can do it, maybe I can too.
That probably explains a lot about why kids often imitate their older siblings, or people pick up trends within their own peer groups.
Absolutely. And related to that is simply liking the model. Are they warm, friendly, someone you admire?
Yeah, you're probably more open to learning from someone you actually like rather than someone cold or off-putting. Seems intuitive.
It often is. We gravitate towards positive role models. And then circling back slightly, there's that self-efficacy point again, but from the learner's perspective.
How so?
Well, your own level of self-efficacy strongly predicts whether you'll even attempt to imitate something, especially if it looks difficult. People with high self-efficacy are more likely to try challenging things and stick with them even if they stumble at first.
Whereas someone with low self-efficacy might see a challenge and just think, nope, not even going to try. I'll probably fail.
Exactly. They might avoid the situation altogether. So self-efficacy is a really powerful moderator in this whole process.
Okay, this theoretical framework is really clear. Now let's talk about the research that really put this on the map. The Bobo doll study. That one's famous.
Infamous, perhaps. Yes, the 1961 Bobo doll experiment by Bandura, Ross, and Ross was absolutely pivotal. They had a couple of main goals.
Which were?
First, they wanted to see if children would imitate specific aggressive acts they saw an adult perform. Second, they hypothesized that kids would be more likely to imitate a model of the same sex.
Okay, and how did they set it up? It involved kids and this inflatable doll, right?
That's right. They used preschool-aged children, around 3 to 6 years old. They divided them into groups. Some kids watched an adult model aggressively attack a Bobo doll, hitting it with a mallet, punching it, kicking it, yelling aggressive things like, "Suck him in the nose."
Wow.
Another group watched an adult model who was non-aggressive, just playing quietly with some other toys and ignoring the Bobo doll. And a control group saw no model at all.
And the same-sex versus opposite-sex model part?
Yep. Within those model groups, some kids saw a male model, some saw a female model. Then, after the observation phase, they took each child individually to another room with some really cool toys.
Ah, but there was a catch.
There was. After a couple of minutes, the experimenter told the child they couldn't play with those toys after all because they were reserved for other children. The idea was to induce a bit of frustration in all the kids, kind of level the playing field emotionally.
Okay, make them all a little bit annoyed.
Exactly. Then finally, they took the child to a third room that had various toys, including a Bobo doll and the mallet, and observed their behavior through a one-way mirror for 20 minutes.
And what happened? Did watching the aggressive adult make a difference?
A huge difference. The children who had seen the aggressive model showed significantly more imitative aggression, hitting the doll, using the mallet, repeating the aggressive phrases compared to the kids in the non-aggressive model group or the control group.
So direct imitation of pretty specific aggressive acts.
Yes, and they also showed more non-imitative aggression too, just generally being more aggressive.
What about the same-sex model hypothesis?
That was supported too. Boys showed more physical aggression overall, and they imitated the male aggressive model more than the female one. Girls imitated the verbal aggression more, and they imitated the female model slightly more for verbal and the male model more for physical. But the same-sex effect was clearest with the boys imitating the male model's physical aggression.
Interesting. And wasn't there something about comments the kids made?
Yes, some of the boys, after watching the female model being aggressive, made comments like, "Ladies shouldn't do that," which kind of suggests they'd already internalized some gender roles about aggression, even at that young age.
Wow. So the study seemed to strongly support both observational learning of aggression and the idea that the model's characteristics like gender matter.
Definitely. It was powerful evidence for Bandura's theory. But, like all influential studies, it faced scrutiny and criticism.
Right. No study is perfect. What were the main critiques?
Well, a big one was ecological validity. Critics argued that the lab setting was artificial, the kids had a very brief encounter with the model who was a stranger, and they were intentionally frustrated.
So the question is, does hitting an inflatable doll in a lab, after being deliberately annoyed, really tell us how kids learn and use aggression in say the playground or at home.
Exactly. Is aggression towards a doll the same as aggression towards another person? It's a fair question. Does it generalize?
What else? Any methodological issues?
Some pointed out that in that first study, the adult model's behavior wasn't perfectly standardized. Different models might have acted slightly differently. Bandura actually addressed this in a later study using film, which made the model inconsistent. Also, the way they initially matched kids on aggression levels based on teacher and parent ratings might not have been perfectly accurate, and some wondered about demand characteristics. Meaning, did the children perhaps think that the researchers wanted them to hit the doll? Like, they saw the adult do it, now it's their turn in this room with the same doll. Maybe they were just trying to please the adults.
That's possible, I suppose. And what about ethics? Exposing young kids to aggressive adult behavior.
That became a major concern, especially later on. Was it ethical to potentially teach children aggressive behaviors? There was no guarantee they'd unlearn it or that it wouldn't spill over into real life. You likely couldn't get approval for such a study today.
Yeah, ethical standards have definitely evolved. You mentioned Bandura did a follow-up using film.
Yes, in 1963, Bandura, Ross, and Ross did another study specifically looking at media. They showed children either a film of an adult model being aggressive towards the Bobo doll, similar to the live model, or a cartoon version where a cat character acted aggressively towards a Bobo doll.
A cartoon cat beating up a Bobo doll. Okay.
Right. And then there was a control group that saw no film.
And the results? Did watching it on screen have the same effect?
Pretty much, yes. The kids who watched the violent film, whether it was the real-life model or the cartoon cat, showed significantly more aggression towards the Bobo doll afterwards compared to the control group.
So it wasn't just about seeing a live person. Seeing aggression portrayed in media, even cartoon media, seemed to lead to imitation.
Exactly. This finding, understandably, really fueled the ongoing debate about media violence and its potential impact on children's behavior.
Which makes perfect sense through the lens of this theory, right? Kids see aggressive acts, maybe see them rewarded or at least not punished in the show. They pay attention, remember it.
Precisely. They learn aggressive scripts, potentially, and they form those outcome expectancies. Maybe they see the hero being aggressive and getting what they want, which acts as a kind of vicarious reinforcement.
Has other research looked at this connection between TV violence and real-world aggression over time?
Yes, quite a bit. A famous one is the longitudinal study by Huseman and Aron, starting back in the 60s and running for over 15 years.
15 years, wow. What do they track?
They monitored children's television viewing habits, particularly the amount of violent TV they watched, and also measured their aggression levels at different points in time, elementary school, teenage years, even into adulthood.
And what was the connection?
They found a significant positive correlation. Kids who watched more violent TV in elementary school tended to be rated as more aggressive by their peers when they were teenagers.
Okay, a correlation.
And even more strikingly, they found that boys who watched high levels of TV violence at age 8 were significantly more likely to have been arrested and prosecuted for criminal acts by age 30.
That sounds concerning, but again, correlation isn't causation, right?
Exactly. That's the big caveat. The study shows a link, but it doesn't prove that watching violent TV caused the later aggression or criminal behavior.
What else could be going on?
Well, maybe kids who are already predisposed to being aggressive just prefer watching more violent TV. It could be a personality thing, what they call dispositional factors, or maybe it's bidirectional ambiguity. Does the TV cause the aggression? Or does being aggressive lead you to watch more violent TV? Or maybe both influence each other in a cycle.
Right. It's complex. What about that Canadian study you mentioned earlier, the natural experiment?
Well, yes. Kimball and colleagues in 1986. That was unique. They studied a town in Canada that, due to its location, didn't have television reception.
A town with no TV. Hard to imagine now.
Right. So they were able to measure children's aggression levels before TV was introduced, and then again 2 years after it arrived.
Yeah.
They found a significant increase in both verbal and physical aggression among the children 2 years after television was introduced.
Okay, that seems to point more strongly towards TV having an effect, since they had a baseline measurement before it even arrived.
It's definitely more suggestive than just a correlation study, yes. But even then, you can't be 100% certain TV was the only factor that changed in that town over those 2 years. Still, it adds weight to the idea that media exposure can influence behavior, consistent with social cognitive theory.
But it's crucial to remember, this theory isn't just about negative behaviors like aggression, is it? Learning by observation can be positive too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a really important point. The exact same principles, attention, retention, motivation, potential, applied to learning pro-social behaviors.
Right.
Think about educational programs like Sesame Street. Decades of research show it's effective at teaching kids things like sharing, empathy, cooperation, even basic literacy and numeracy skills, partly through modeling positive interactions between characters.
So kids see Big Bird sharing his cookies, and they learn that sharing is a good thing to do.
Essentially, yes. And there's a whole methodology built around this for positive social change called the Sabido method.
Sabido method. Tell me about that.
It was developed by Miguel Sabido, drawing directly on Bandura's theory. It uses long-running TV and radio soap operas, especially in developing countries, to address social issues.
How does it work?
They create relatable characters, some who model the desired positive behaviors, like using family planning or practicing safe sex or seeking education, some who model negative behaviors and suffer the consequences, and some doubters who eventually change their minds. Viewers identify with characters, see the outcomes of their actions vicarious reinforcement again, and are hopefully motivated to adopt the positive behaviors.
So it's like using the power of narrative and role models very deliberately for social good.
Exactly. It's been used to promote literacy, reduce the spread of HIV, empower women, encourage environmental protection, all sorts of things.
Is there evidence it actually works?
Yes, there is. For example, a serial drama in Tanzania called Twende na Wakati, Let's Go with the Times, used the Sabido method. Research found that listeners reported increased use of family planning methods, higher belief in women's equality, and more discussion about HIV/AIDS prevention compared to non-listeners.
That's fascinating. So the same theory that raises concerns about media violence can also be harnessed to create positive change.
Absolutely. It highlights the power and responsibility that comes with creating media content.
Okay, so we have the Bobo doll studies showing imitation of aggression, correlational studies linking TV violence and aggression, the Canadian study showing an increase after TV arrived, and also evidence for positive modeling. But wasn't there a study with kind of opposite findings, the St. Helena one?
Yes, the St. Helena study by Charlton and colleagues, published in 2002. That one is really interesting because it provides a strong counterpoint.
St. Helena, that's a really remote island, right?
Extremely remote in the South Atlantic. And because of that isolation, television wasn't introduced there until 1995. This gave researchers a truly unique natural laboratory.
So similar to the Canadian town, but maybe even more isolated. What did they do?
They filmed children's free play behavior in school playgrounds, kids aged 3 to 8 before television arrived, and then again 5 years after its introduction.
And crucially, what kind of TV did they get? Was it like all gentle programming?
No, that's the key thing. They analyzed the TV content available and found it had levels of violence very similar to what children were watching in the UK at the time. So the exposure to violent content was comparable.
Okay, so based on the earlier studies, you'd predict an increase in aggression, right?
You would, but that's not what they found.
Really? No increase?
No significant increase in antisocial behavior at all. The kids' behavior remained generally pro-social and well-behaved, just as it had been before television arrived.
Wow. Okay, that completely contrasts with the Bobo doll findings and the Canadian study. How do we explain that? Same violent TV, different outcome.
It's a fantastic question, and it really forces us to think beyond just the stimulus, beyond just the violent content itself.
What could be the difference?
Well, the researchers suggested that the pre-existing social context on St. Helena was crucial. It was a very close-knit community with strong social controls, clear expectations for behavior, and perhaps less anonymity than in larger societies. Maybe the community norms and adult supervision acted as a powerful buffer against imitating the negative behaviors seen on TV.
So the social environment, the culture the kids were immersed in, was maybe more influential than the TV characters.
That's a very plausible interpretation. It suggests that observational learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. The broader social context, existing values, peer influence, adult guidance, all these things likely mediate how media messages are interpreted and whether they lead to imitation.
That study really adds an important layer of complexity, doesn't it? It's not just exposure, imitation.
Not at all. It highlights that other factors are clearly at play.
So let's try and wrap our heads around social cognitive learning theory overall. What are its big strengths?
Well, its major strength is providing a really clear explanation for how behaviors get passed down within families, cultures, peer groups. It also explains how we can learn complex skills without laborious trial and error. We can just watch an expert. And it incorporates cognition. It's not just mindless imitation.
And the weaknesses or limitations.
One key limitation is that learning doesn't always equal performance. Someone might learn a behavior through observation, but not actually do it until much later, or maybe never. This time lag makes it hard to definitively prove the causal link sometimes.
Right, the connection might be there, but it's hard to pin down if the behavior shows up weeks or months later.
Exactly. Also, the theory doesn't fully explain why some people just don't seem to learn or imitate a behavior, even when all the conditions, attention, retention, motivation, potential seem to be met. There's still variability doesn't capture perfectly.
And the research base.
A lot of the foundational research, like the Bobo doll studies, was experimental and conducted in labs. As we discussed, that raises questions about how well the findings generalize to the real messy world, the ecological validity issue.
Makes sense. But despite these points, it feels like a really influential and useful theory.
Oh, hugely influential. It's been applied widely in areas like health education, designing campaigns to encourage healthy behaviors by modeling them, and in clinical psychology, for instance, using modeling to help people overcome phobias or anxieties. It provides a solid framework for understanding a fundamental way humans learn.
Okay, so let's try to boil this down for everyone listening. What are the absolute must-know takeaways from this deep dive into social cognitive learning theory?
I'd say the big one is we learn a lot just by watching others. This observational learning isn't automatic. It involves thinking, paying attention, remembering what we saw, being motivated to do it, and believing we can do it. That self-efficacy piece.
And who we watch matters, right?
Definitely. We're more likely to imitate people we see as similar to us, people we like, people who are consistent, and people who get rewarded for their actions. That vicarious reinforcement idea.
And understanding all this,
Yeah.
how can that help you, the listener?
Well, it can make you more aware of the subtle influences around you, the behaviors you might be picking up unconsciously from colleagues, friends, or even media figures. It can help you be more intentional about who you choose as role models if you're trying to learn something new.
Yeah, and maybe also more conscious of how your actions might be modeling behavior for others, like your kids or junior colleagues.
Exactly. It works both ways. Recognizing this process can be really valuable, whether you're focused on personal growth, parenting, teaching, or leading a team.
So to leave you with something to chew on, here's our final provocative thought. The St. Helena study showed that even with exposure to violent media similar to elsewhere, kids' behavior didn't worsen. This really contrasts with other findings. So the question is, besides the direct influence of models, what other powerful factors within a community, a culture, or even an individual's mindset might determine whether observed behaviors actually get imitated and become lasting habits? What is it about that broader context that makes the difference?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Definitely something to ponder.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.